to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is beyond reactivity, where when we clear ourselves of triggers, when we allow ourselves to move into greater wholeness, we become much less reactive and are able to be much more present to circumstances and responsive. And so we live beyond the reactivity that kind of drove us into pattern behaviors perhaps in the past. So it should be a fun conversation. Before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. It's so good to have you here joining us this morning, and everyone else who's sharing in our conversation. Today, we're talking about beyond reactivity and how wholeness is a path to responsiveness. So it's really quite extraordinary that as we heal our past wounds, that we move more in more, and as we move more deeply into wholeness, that we become much less reactive and much better able to be responsive, that we can be present as we heal these past wounds and triggers, where we open up our capacity to really be present and to recognize that other people's stuff, we don't have to take on other people's stuff. And this is actually a revelation when we get to a place to recognize, wait a second, that person, their anger, their reactivity, their upset is theirs. It's theirs. And I do not have an obligation to take it on. Just because somebody's angry, I don't have to get angry in response. Just because someone's sad or disappointed, let's say I'm disappointed in you. Say someone's disappointed. It's not necessary to own their disappointment, because that's their expectation. That's their experience. It doesn't mean that we need to be callous to other people's experiences or ignore or deny them. But we can recognize that their experience is their experience, that they have sovereignty over themselves, that they have the option to choose to be disappointed, or that they have in their way generated disappointment. Now, if I have made a promise and then I have broken a promise, and someone expresses their disappointment, I want to be able to respond to that. I want to be able to be accountable to that. I'm not talking here about denying our accountability, and we can choose how to interact with that. So let's say I make a promise, I've broken a promise, you're disappointed, and I am actually being accountable, and I can see if I can make amends for that, if that's appropriate for me. Or I can interact with that in a responsible way to say, yes, I broke the promise. And I apologize, or whatever feels appropriate. And then the guilt from that, I can perpetuate the guilt from that, or I can be clean about the interaction, and clean it up, clean up a lack of integrity. And when it's done, I can allow it to be done rather than continue to replay and replay and replay. I can allow myself to be complete with that interaction, with really truly having taken responsibility, being accountable to myself and to the other person. And then I can allow myself the freedom to move on rather than replaying it and using it as a cudgel to beat myself up, which is something that we often do, right? We'll create circumstances. We have a wound from our history, and we have these ideas about who we are, or how we behave. And maybe, many of us have contended with self-esteem issues, believing that we are that we mess everything up, or that we're not worthy, or that we're bad or wrong. And so we'll use a situation where there has been some kind of friction to then reinforce those old patterns. And as we heal from those old patterns, as we get to a place where we're living out of wholeness, then we can allow ourselves the fact that we're human and we're not always perfect. And it doesn't mean that those imperfections are the defining aspect of our character or our being. And so it's interesting to, when we're whole, we're better able to be accountable. So if somebody calls us on something and says, hey, you know what, I feel really hurt about that whole interaction, when I am coming from a place of wholeness, I can be there and actually connect to that person. I don't have to fend them off, defend them, defend myself from them. I don't have to justify. I can say, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. I apologize for that. It wasn't an appropriate response or action or whatever. I can own it because I know that I'm not perfect, and there are times when I can learn and readjust and rise to the occasion. I think that in many circumstances, what happens is, if we're made wrong, we take that on as a threat to our identity, or our foundational being, or our sense of who we are. And we recoil, we defend, we resist, all those things. And when we are integrated, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about coming from a place of wholeness. I'm talking about being integrated, recognizing that essentially we're all those things. We're all the things. You know, we're smart, we're stupid, you know, like in different situations. We're happy, we're sad, we're conscientious and oblivious, you know, like that. At different times we go through the spectrum of all these different expressions, and no one of those expressions is who we are. And so we tend to extrapolate our experiences and make them bigger and more pervasive in so many ways. So if we've done something wrong and we feel some shame or guilt around that, that tends to be something that reaches its tentacles into all different areas of our lives, and particularly when we are living from our wounds rather than from our wholeness. And so coming to a place of reconciliation around our wounds is a really important thing. To recognize I'm not always good. You know, I'm not always anything. I'm not always bad. You know, whatever good and bad might mean, that we are changeable. I have to say, I've found so much freedom in creating or connecting with an identity of self as something that is really process rather than something that is a fixed quantity. That I am who I am is an expression of life expressing itself. Allison Smith, welcome, welcome. How wonderful to have you join us. I don't think I've seen your name here before. So Allison says, so many people are unaware of their wounds and are acting out. Absolutely. Absolutely, Allison. That's exactly the case. So I was talking, and that's kind of what our lives are, is until we wake up to our behaviors, we are typically just acting out in these unconscious ways. I was speaking with somebody the other day, and they were talking about having to navigate a massive disruption in a relationship where someone showed up in a way that was unfathomable, completely out of integrity. And what was really interesting is they were able, which was pretty powerful, a pretty strong indicator of their wholeness. They were able to interact with this person and care for them and forgive them and appreciate them, and at the same time there was some emotional reactivity on their part, like kind of where they closed this person out, even though they were feeling, it's paradoxical, I know, they were feeling love and appreciation for this person and forgiveness for this person, and at the same time they were like creating this distance. And so that was their reactivity too, that was coming out of their past and their programming, that there needed to be this wall or whatever. And so being able to point that out was like, okay, here's this person's wound and reactivity, and here's your wound and reactivity, and they're interacting with each other. And that's typically how we interact with each other, is from our wounds, which is pretty wild, right? That other people get to trigger us and we get to trigger other people, so that we get to see these patterns of behavior. And if we have the wisdom to be able to step back, the wisdom and the bandwidth, like the presence to be able to stand back and see the dynamics, that gives us a clue as to avenues of our own healing. So Rosalind says, does reactivity also connect to our attachment and ability to detach from a desire or outcome? The question of attachment is such an interesting and tricky conversation, I think. I think the reactivity and attachment are definitely connected, probably inextricably connected. I'm thinking of a particular situation for myself, which is I am set to go on a trip that I've been very excited about going on next week. So there will be replays if I go next week. And in fact, there's going to be a replay tomorrow because I have another commitment. So just a heads up. But a circumstance has arisen that makes it so that I may not end up going on that trip. And the old me would have gotten pretty reactive about this because I'd be super attached to going on that trip. And the truth is, I really want to go on that trip. And if you've been around this conversation that we have regularly, one of the foundational things that I'm living into in my life is that life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. Now, it might sound trite on the surface, but but living into that and living into who I am as life expressing itself. Those things go arm in arm. Then I can allow life to unfold as it does without reacting to it. Like if I were super attached to believing that life has to unfold the way that I think it should unfold, and that these plans should be, honored and whatever, rather than life is unfolding as it's meant to, and for me and through me, then I can just be present with the unfolding. And if that trip doesn't come about because of these other circumstances, then it doesn't come about and it's happening for me. I may not understand how, I may not understand what the dynamics are, but I can just allow that that's the case. And whether it's true or not, it's a very empowering place to come from, because I don't have to work. I don't have to kick and scream and worry and fight. I can just let things unfold and see what happens as a result. What happens. I can just not resist, not be attached, because I know that it's unfolding to my benefit. So I think you nailed it, Rosalind, that attachment really creates reactivity. If I have an attachment to I'm right all the time and somebody points out that I'm not right in a situation, I'm gonna react. I'm gonna fight. I might kick and scream. I might make them wrong. I might try and twist things around to deny that I'm not right in this situation. If I'm not attached to being right or wrong, then I can allow myself to be wrong in a situation and to learn something out of it and to respond appropriately. And that's as we move into greater wholeness, because we don't have all these triggers. We're not like running around with all these buttons that are just waiting to bump into somebody or something, and then we go off on our own, all these different directions, all these different tangents. Push this button, you go left, push this button, you go right, and like you're being bounced around like a pinball in a pinball machine. And that's that's really how most of us live. And the truth is, when we're encountering that other people are interacting that way, we have the ability, when as we're approaching greater and greater wholeness, to be able to allow that that's their journey. That's what their reactivity is creating for them. And then to respond in an appropriate way in terms of whether we're taking it on, whether we're owning, we're so there was a story where a family member, so Allison says their journey, yes, but the thing, well, I want to tell you the story that I was just thinking of, but the thing is that their journey is entangled and entwined in our journey. So the fact that somebody's getting all bent out of shape in your presence in response to you in some way, that interaction is also part of your journey. And how you react to that, how you react or respond to that, is part of your journey. And their reactivity can trigger your reactivity and give you an opportunity to recognize, oh, wow, this is an area where maybe there's potential for my growth or my healing as well. So it's not as simple as us and them, it's that we're all intertwined. So Allison says, yes, part of my journey. Thank you. Yes, we're all deeply intertwined. And we're here to kind of play each other's musical buttons in so many ways. And it's kind of a fascinating thing when we look at it that way. There's this really rich tapestry. So anyway, this is the saga of the bagels. So there was a relative of one of the folks I was talking with, who I guess they had the kids had given this relative some bagels for a certain occasion, and then this person came back and said, I was really disappointed that I didn't get bagels on Valentine's Day and St. Patty's Day. I was really disappointed that I didn't get that you didn't give me bagels. And so, because there's some sense of imbalance in the relationship, I'll just call it that. The people that were told about this other person's disappointment, the kids, were like, they got indignant and upset and reactive about, are you kidding me? Like this whole thing about bagels and whatever. And there was all this upset and reactivity because it triggered, well, maybe we're not being good enough kids, or maybe we're not performing well, and how ridiculous is, like when our idea of ourselves is threatened, we often try to turn it around and say, well, how petty is that, to turn around the blame, rather than saying, oh, I didn't realize bagels were so important to you. I'd be happy to send you bagels. Right? Like there's, when there's a communication, we often have so much of our own story underlying it that we react out of that story instead of being able to hear the communication. So Allison says, all deeply intertwined. I love that. Well, good, because that's how it is. It's really interesting to see how how it's there's this reciprocity, this dynamism, this dynamic exchange that happens with us, where somebody says something, somebody reacts and hears something different. Like somebody will say, oh, that's nice. And maybe if I feel inadequate, I might think, what do they mean that's nice? What do they mean? I mean, what's wrong with it? What isn't good enough? They might have meant, oh, that's nice. Like really, truly, that's nice. Authentically, I believe that. Or they might have meant, well, that's nice. And it's a criticism, but if we can come from wholeness and we hear that criticism in the tone of voice or whatever, we if we're coming from wholeness, it's like, okay, that's their stuff, whatever, and maybe even say, well, to further the communication, what's going on for you? Like what's happening? That I'm hearing something in your voice and I'm wondering what's going on for you. So, I mean, coming from a place of wholeness, we don't have to get defensive and say, well, yeah, it is nice, right? Do you see these? There are all these subtleties, and so much of it is what we bring to the table, what we bring to the interpretation. So once again, we're talking about that we create our own reality as a result of all these triggers, all our history. In many cases, it's created for us and we don't even recognize it. So what we get to do is to start looking more deeply at these interactions to say, oh, let's be curious. What's going on here? Instead of judging it, we can get curious. So Allison says, I pick up subtleties in people's tones. Yes, you know what, Allison, we a lot of us, probably most of us do, and we make meaning about that, and then we interact with that meaning as if it's truth, and oftentimes it's based on our own reactivity. Anyway, that's it for this morning. I so appreciate you and your engagement. It's so rich for me to have the opportunity to dialogue with you guys. And that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. So please like and follow Facebook and YouTube for Enlightened World Network. And for me, the links are in the chat. And again, so much appreciation. And until next time.